The photograph was discovered in a cardboard box that smelled faintly of mildew and coal dust. It was wrapped in yellowed tissue, folded once across the center, and stamped on the back in faded ink, Company Store Line, Alabama, 1905. No photographer's signature, no record number, only a faint pencil note on the margin. Martha, Eli, and Samuel. The archivist who found it could not have said what drew her to it. Perhaps it was the stillness, the quiet dignity of its light, or perhaps it was the feeling that within the calm, something had been left unfinished. When she lifted it toward the lamp, the surface shimmered, that strange silver bloom unique to gelatin prints from the early century. In that gleam, time itself seemed to bend, and the ghosts of the image stirred. A woman and two boys stood on the porch of a wooden building, a company store, though the faded sign above the door could only just be read. The planks beneath their feet were uneven and scarred by years of boots. The air, even in the frozen frame, felt heavy with the dust of summer. The mother, Martha Givens according to the scrawl, stood with her shoulders squared, but tired. Her dress was plain cotton, sun-faded to the color of old parchment. She wore no jewelry, no adornment, nothing that did not belong to survival itself. Her left hand rested protectively on the smaller boy's shoulder, the other clutching a basket woven from split reed, the kind sold cheap behind the store. The younger boy, Eli, looked straight ahead, though his eyes seemed to drift beyond the camera, somewhere just over the photographer's shoulder where the horizon would have been. His bare feet rested on the planks, toes curled slightly inward, and the faintest trace of a smile, or perhaps fear, pressed at the edge of his lips. The older boy, Samuel, stood behind them, a fraction taller than his mother's shoulder. His face was harder to read, caught mid-breath, as if he had turned toward the camera a heartbeat too late. In one hand he held a folded paychit, creased from sweat and dirt. They looked ordinary, the way all pain does when it is shared by too many. But there was one detail, quiet, almost invisible, that changed everything. Pinned to each of their shirts was a name tag, handwritten in graphite. The company used these on payday to keep track of dependents and rations. The mother's tag read, Martha Givens, the younger boys, Eli Givens, and the older boys, Samuel Price. 3 names, 2 alike, 1 wrong. The handwriting was identical, drawn by the same hand. The store clerk's perhaps, but the graphite on the third tag was darker, newer, under the right light. The surface gleamed differently, as if the word beneath had been erased. The archivist tilted the photo closer to the lamp. Beneath the P of Price, faint grooves pressed through the paper fibers, the ghost of another letter, curved, looping, the beginning of a G. She adjusted the focus of her magnifier. It wasn't Price, it had once been Givens. A mistake, perhaps, or a correction, or something far heavier than either. Behind them, the wooden facade of the company store loomed, its windows blurred by reflection. Inside, vague shapes of men and children appeared like smudges of smoke. The sign above read, Company Provision and Supply, Pay Tokens Only. No one smiled. No one ever smiled in photographs like these. The light was flat, gray, the kind that comes before a storm. Yet within that light something shimmered, a balance between exhaustion and endurance. The camera had not captured despair, it had captured waiting. When the archivist turned the photograph over, she found a note written in an older hand, trembling, feminine, almost erased by time. They came together, but left apart. The ink had bled into the paper, a bruise that had outlived its writer. She read the line again and again. Each time it sounded different, once as grief, once as confession, once as an accusation whispered through dust. That night, she scanned the photograph under the restoration lamp. Under magnification, every grain of silver became a world. The fibers of the woman's dress, the cracks in the planks, even the faint outline of the camera's shadow on the ground. But there, near the edge of the frame, just beside the boy's shoulder, a mark appeared. Not dust, not damage, a fingerprint. It was faint, pressed into the emulsion while it was still wet, long before the paper had dried. Whoever had handled the print had left a part of themselves inside it. Someone who had touched the truth and decided not to erase it completely. The archivist sat back. The lamp hummed softly. Outside, the city was quiet, rain sliding down the window in slow, even streaks. In the stillness, she whispered the names aloud. Martha, Eli, Samuel. The last one lingered longer than the rest, as if the air had been waiting for someone to say it again. By the next morning, the archivist's report would file the photo under unverified, family identification pending. But long after she left her desk, the image would stay in her mind. The 3 figures on that porch, the erased name, and the faint impression of a fingerprint at the edge. Because photographs like this one never really stop recording. They wait, they listen, And sometimes, when the world grows quiet enough, they remember the names we try to forget. Long before the photograph became a relic, before its corners curled and its names began to fade, it was simply a moment in a day like any other. The end of a long week in a mining town that no one ever remembered by name. The town sat on the edge of Alabama's red hills, its clay roads etched with wagon ruts and footprints, its air thick with coal dust and heat. The mine had been dug into the hillside decades before, swallowing light, men, and promises alike. Everything in that place belonged to the company, the houses, the store, the church pews, even the school bell that rang twice a day, one for the children and one for the workers. The mine owned the land, and by extension, it owned the silence too. Martha Givens had lived there since she was 15. She had married a miner named Luke, who died young, crushed under timber when the shaft collapsed one summer night. There was no grave marker, only a name written in the company ledger. Deceased Givens, Luke, cause, unstable support beam. After that, Martha stayed, not because she wanted to, but because leaving cost more than living. She raised her son Eli in a single-room shack near the riverbed, where the walls sweated in summer and froze in winter. She worked washing laundry for the storekeeper's wife, sometimes sewing when her eyes could bear the lamplight. Each morning, Eli followed her to the pump for water, barefoot, his shirt buttoned crooked, his hair bleached pale from the sun. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. A woman appeared at the edge of the settlement, walking the road barefoot, holding the hand of a boy who could barely stand. Her dress was torn, her lips cracked. She asked for a doctor, but the company clinic refused her. The clerk said she wasn't registered. No record, no treatment. The boy coughed, a wet, hollow sound. Martha saw it happen from across the road. She didn't think, she just moved. She led them to her home, boiled water, tore strips from a sheet, and pressed a damp cloth to the boy's forehead. The woman's hands shook as she whispered prayers that didn't sound like any Martha had heard before. When night fell, the boy's fever broke. By morning, the woman was gone. She left behind a note, folded once, tucked under the bowl beside the bed. His name is Samuel. Tell him I will find him again. CP. Martha read the words 3 times before they sank in. She looked at the sleeping boy, frail but breathing, and knew the truth. He had been left, not abandoned, and that was worse. The company man came that week, counting heads for the new payroll system. He was efficient, polite, and blind to nuance. Name? He asked. Martha Givens. Dependents? She hesitated. 2. He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask more. He wrote the names, Eli Givens, Samuel Givens. For months, that's how it stayed. No one questioned the second boy. But order, in company towns, is a fragile thing. That spring, a new manager arrived from the north, the kind who liked rules. He introduced ration tokens, head counts, and weekly verification. Dependents were to be listed by blood, not by mercy. The photographer arrived on the same day the new tags were issued. He was a stranger, tall, with the posture of a man who had never worked with his hands. He said he was sent by the mining board to document the prosperity of southern operations. His brass camera glimmered in the sun like something from another world. He asked Martha to stand in line with the others outside the store. She didn't want to, but refusal in such towns always came at a cost. So she stood, Eli beside her, Samuel behind. The clerk at the window read from a new list, checking each family. Martha Givens. Yes, sir. Eli Givens. She nodded again. Then he paused. Samuel, Price? Martha blinked. No, sir, it's Givens. The man frowned. Says Price here. You'll need to fix your record, ma'am. She started to speak again, but he'd already moved on. Behind the counter, another clerk was stamping tags, one after another, methodical, impersonal. When he reached Samuel, he wrote Price in heavy strokes, pressed the pin through and tied it to the boy's shirt. The graphite glistened. The damage was done. When the photographer raised his lens, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time that day. Martha squinted, her expression caught between pride and fatigue. Eli's mouth was slightly open, his hands clenched around a piece of folded paper. Samuel turned his head at the last moment, eyes lowered, his tag flashing silver in the light. Click. The shutter blinked, and time sealed its secret. That evening, the line outside the store dissolved, and the porch emptied. Martha walked home carrying her basket, Eli tugging at her skirt, Samuel a few steps behind. No one spoke. Later, when the boys slept, Martha unpinned the tag from Samuel's shirt. She turned it over in the lamplight. The back of the paper bore faint graphite marks as though a different word had once been written there. She flipped it again, staring at Price. Then she took a pin from her hair and scratched lightly at the surface until the upper layer of graphite flaked away, revealing a curve, the ghost of another name. It was faint, almost gone, but she could see it. Givens. That night, the rain came hard. rattling the tin roof. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photograph, the three of them frozen, the tag shining like a wound. She thought of the woman who had left the boy, of the letter signed only CP, of Mercy mistaken for deception, and for the first time in her life, Martha prayed not for forgiveness but for remembrance, that even if the world called him by another name, something, somewhere, would remember who he truly was. Years drifted across Alabama like red dust, settling, softening, then vanishing again. The mine changed hands, reopened, and changed hands again. But the faces in town never really changed. They just aged into echoes of themselves. By 1910, the photograph had already begun to yellow. It hung for years above the counter in the company store, pinned crooked under the glass lamp, a quiet reminder of who waited and who belonged. Most customers passed it without seeing, but not Samuel. He saw it every week. At 17, he worked in the sorting shed, where coal dust stuck to the skin like a second shadow. He was strong now, taller than the foreman, sharper in the eyes, quieter in the mouth. People said he had the look of someone who had already left, even when he was standing still. He still lived with Martha, though he no longer called her Mama aloud. Eli had begun working in the stables, whistling at dawn, his laughter easy in the way only true sons know how to laugh. But Samuel's voice had gone inward, slow and careful, like he was afraid of breaking something inside his chest every time he spoke. Sometimes he'd sit outside after work, running his fingers across the old name tag Martha kept in her Bible. The edges were soft now, the ink faded, but the letters still warred with each other on the page. Price, Givens, two ghosts sharing one body. He didn't hate the woman who had written it. He just didn't know who she was. And sometimes when the wind turned from the south, bringing with it the smell of iron and rain, he would remember a sound, the memory of a voice, half forgotten, calling his name through fever, a voice that didn't belong to Martha. That spring, the preacher came to town. He was a traveling man with worn boots and a book of records thicker than his Bible. He claimed to help company towns set their souls straight. On a warm afternoon, he knocked on Martha's door. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm tracing baptism records for the parish near Montgomery. We believe one of your dependents, a Samuel Price, may have been baptized there years ago." Martha froze. The world narrowed to the sound of that name. She smiled faintly, but her eyes betrayed her. "I'm sorry, Reverend, you must be mistaken. My boy's name is Givens." He studied her a moment, then nodded politely. Still, before leaving, he placed a small paper card on the table. "Should you wish to visit, the church doors are open. The record is under his name." When he was gone, Martha folded the card and slipped it into the drawer beside the lamp. She never showed it to Samuel, but he found it anyway. A month later, he left for Montgomery without a word. He took only what he could carry, the tag, the card, and the photograph he had secretly pulled from the store wall after closing. The road was long, the days cruel, but the need to see what truth had been written under his name burned like a second sun. When he reached the parish, he found it smaller than he'd imagined. A single steeple, half collapsed, a bell that hadn't rung in years. Inside, an old nun greeted him with a look that felt like recognition and grief bound together. "Can I help you, son?" He placed the card on the table. "I'm looking for a record, Samuel Price." She stared at the name, then at his face. Her lips trembled. "You look like her." "Who?" "Clara Price." He didn't move. The name hit him like a sound remembered from another life. The nun took him to the archive room, a place where dust turned the air golden, where every name was a story someone had tried to save from erasure. She pulled a ledger from the shelf, the paper brittle and brown. "There," she said softly, tracing her finger across the page. "Samuel Price, born 1898, baptized 1899, mother, Clara Price. No father listed." Below, written in the margin, almost an afterthought, "Placed in care of Monsieur Givens, approved by parish, 1905. The room fell silent. The faint hum of the ceiling fan was the only sound left. He left the church at dusk, walking down the dirt road until the light began to die. He stopped by the riverbank and unfolded the photograph, holding it up against the sinking sun. The faces stared back at him, Martha's weary calm, Eli's innocence, his own reluctant shadow. The tags gleamed faintly in the fading light. For the first time he understood what it meant to carry two names. One was given by blood, the other by mercy. He tore the photograph in half, not from anger, but from mercy of his own, and let the pieces drift into the river. They floated apart, then together again, caught by the same current that had once brought him there. When he returned home weeks later, Martha met him at the door. Her hands shook as she reached for his face. "You found her," she said. He nodded. "I did. And she's gone." Martha closed her eyes, tears tracing lines into the dust on her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Samuel." He smiled softly. "Don't be." He reached into his pocket and placed the folded name tag in her palm. "You kept this for me," he said. "Now I'm giving it back." She looked at it, the worn paper, the faint curve of two names struggling to coexist. "Which one will you keep?" she whispered. He looked past her toward the hills that glowed orange in the dying sun. "Both," he said. "One for the woman who gave me life, the other for the one who taught me what it means to live." That night he left again. No one saw where he went. But in the Bible Martha kept by her bed, she found something new tucked between its pages, a strip of photo paper, curled from age, with 3 faint words written in graphite. "Thank you, Mother." The photograph surfaced again in 1983. Folded between invoices, dust, and ledgers inside a rusted filing cabinet, it was discovered during the demolition of what used to be the company office. A construction worker had pulled the drawer open and found it lying flat against the back, pressed between brittle pages that crumbled at his touch. He might have thrown it away if not for the way the light caught it, that pale shimmer of silver on paper that no color photograph could ever imitate. He brushed the dirt off, unfolded it carefully, and saw them. A woman and 2 boys, standing on a wooden porch beneath a sign that read, "Company Provision and Supply." He didn't know their names. He didn't need to. Something about their faces, still, patient, defiant, felt too alive to discard. So he turned it in to the local archive in Montgomery. That's how the photograph came home. Years later, an archivist named Ruth Carver cataloged it. She was quiet by nature, the kind of woman who spoke more with her hands than her mouth, who preferred the company of paper to people. She'd been restoring Civil War letters that month, bleaching away time and sweat with chemicals she no longer trusted. When she opened the envelope marked "Unsorted Company Records, Alabama, 1900-1910, the photograph slipped out and fell into her lap. The faces were faint beneath a film of dust. The woman's eyes looked downward. The smaller boy's shirt was nearly lost to blur, but the older boy, his face remained sharp, as if the emulsion had fought decay on his behalf, and just beneath his chin, pinned crooked to his chest, the name tag still clung stubbornly to the image. Samuel Price. The graphite had faded into gray smudges, but under the restoration light, something shimmered beneath it, faint indentations where another word had once been written. She took her magnifier and leaned closer. The paper fibers caught the light, and there, beneath the P, a different letter curved upward, hidden but defiant. A G, then the faint trace of an I, then the rest, ghosts of graphite rising slowly from the grave of erasure. Givens. Ruth's heart slowed. She tilted the photograph in silence, as if afraid that breathing might erase it again. 2 names, one above the other, a life divided, yet both still there. She ran her fingertip lightly along the edge of the photo. The surface was cracked, its fibers warped by humidity and years of human handling. In one corner she noticed a fingerprint, faint, pressed into the emulsion while it was still wet. She'd seen thousands of prints like this before, but never one that felt like an answer. Whoever had left it wasn't careless. They had pressed their touch into the image deliberately, as if to say, "Remember me right." That evening, the archive closed early for a storm. Ruth stayed behind, her desk illuminated by a single brass lamp. Rain slid down the tall windows in streaks that looked like handwriting. She laid the photograph flat and turned it over. On the back, in ink nearly erased by time, was a line written in an elegant, trembling hand. They came together, but left apart. And below that, written in pencil, darker, different, a second line, smaller, steadier, found again. She stared for a long time. The first sentence felt like mourning, the second, forgiveness. She switched off the lamp. The light from the window fell across the image instead, a faint bluish sheen that caught on the boy's tag. For an instant, it gleamed not gray but silver, like something alive. Then the thunder rolled, and it was gone. In the weeks that followed, Ruth couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. She searched census records, payroll lists, birth registries, but the trail was fragmented, the ink long gone. There was a record of a Martha Givens, widow of a miner, registered in 1905. A note beside her name, 2 dependents. Then, a year later, her name vanished. No relocation, no death record, just a blank space, an absence mistaken for completion. And further down the same ledger, she found another entry, a Samuel Price, age 22, listed as a rail worker in St. Louis, Missouri. No family, no next of kin. It wasn't proof, but it was something. One evening, as the storm clouds returned, Ruth projected the restored image onto the archive wall, 10 feet tall, bathed in pale sepia light. She turned off all other lamps. The room filled with silence. The 3 figures stood there once more, larger than life, a mother and her two sons, forever waiting for their names to match. The light traced their outlines softly, as though trying to complete something left undone. For a moment Ruth thought she saw it, a faint fourth shadow at the edge of the porch, taller, thinner, facing the others. It flickered, then disappeared. She didn't move, she didn't need to. She just whispered, "I see you," and left the room dark. Decades passed again, as they always do. The world outside changed its shape, its noise, its gods, but inside the archives, the photograph waited. It waited the way old things wait, not for discovery, but for recognition. By the early 2000s, the print had been digitized, cataloged, and stored in the state's historical database under an antiseptic title, Alabama Company Store, 1905, Unidentified Family. No one remembered Martha Givens. No one remembered the boy who bore two names, but the file still lived on a server somewhere, its image rendered in pixels now instead of silver. And yet, when the light of a screen touched it, it looked no less alive. One evening, a young student named David stumbled upon the image while researching early 20th century labor photography. He had never heard of Veilside, never read about company towns, never imagined a world where names could be bought and rewritten. He clicked the thumbnail without knowing why. When the image opened in full size, the silence in his room seemed to change. The woman's eyes looked not at the camera, but at him. The older boy's tag caught the light from his monitor and gleamed faintly, that same impossible shimmer the archivist had seen decades before. He zoomed in, tracing the graphite blur of the name. It read, as the record said, Samuel Price, but something beneath it, faint, lighter, still lingered. He adjusted the exposure, pushing the brightness, pulling the shadows. The image grain thickened, distorted, and then revealed a curve beneath the P, a ghost letter, looping upward, a G. He exhaled slowly. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't need to. All he felt was a sudden ache in his chest, the strange, wordless sorrow that comes when you realize a stranger's pain has survived a century just to look you in the eye. He closed the file, then reopened it. The faces were still there, waiting. He saved the image, printed it, and pinned it to his wall. Weeks later, while writing his thesis, he found himself glancing at it every night. At first, out of habit, then out of something else, something like gratitude. He said once to no one in particular, "Someone loved you enough to keep your name alive." Time, in its mercy, does not erase all things. It forgets the noise, but it keeps the gestures, the touch of a hand against a shoulder, a tag rewritten, a prayer whispered for a child that wasn't born of you, but became yours anyway. The photograph carries all of it, the weight, the waiting, the forgiveness. Even now it remains in the digital archive, its metadata sterile, its file name cold. IMG 1905, Alabama, line, edaro2.tf. But beneath the code and the pixels, the light inside still remembers silver, and the silver still remembers names. If you ever find yourself in the State Museum in Montgomery on a quiet afternoon, there's a hallway where the labor photographs hang. Most visitors walk by quickly, until they reach the one of the woman and her sons. There's something in that photograph that makes people stop. They don't know why, they just do. If you stand close enough, the glass catches your reflection, blending you into theirs, and for a heartbeat, you become part of the story. The air stills, the noise outside fades, and in that moment it feels as if someone, somewhere, whispers from beyond the paper, soft, steady, almost grateful. You remembered. Beneath the photo, the museum label reads, 1905, Alabama Company Store line, a mother and two boys, names don't match, donor unknown, photographer unidentified, mercy survives where memory fails. And when the lights dim at closing hour, and the room fills with the hum of silence, the reflection on that glass changes. The faint outline of a hand appears for a second, pressed from the inside, then fades again, as if it had simply been resting there all along. Veilside Stories, where every photograph breathes again. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and listen closely. Some echoes are not meant to fade.